And all of that isn't even the worst of it. The worst of it is the fact that there could be more bad news for Canadian real estate, as a series of events have created the perfect storm for real estate to explode once again. And this includes everything from inflation cooling down to the Bank of Canada not even discussing increasing interest rates in March, to recent changes to the foreign homebuyer ban, which I'll explain in a minute, basically makes it irrelevant. And last but not least, the federal government basically backstopping current mortgage holders in order to prevent them from defaulting, which is essentially the government intervening in the mortgage market and kicking the can further down the road. And all of this combined creates a scary cocktail that could force real estate prices even higher in the coming years. But before I get into all the details, my name is Nolan Matthias, and if you want to thrive financially, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. Okay, so this video is a little bit of a somber one, primarily because recent changes by the federal government could create an artificial floor for the Canadian real estate market that could see prices be pushed even higher. Now, I'm certainly not somebody who wants to see the market collapse. However, I also believe in letting markets work and allowing the natural fluctuations that should happen in a real estate market to actually happen. But what I'm seeing at this very moment in the Canadian real estate market has me concerned, because combined with additional spending from the federal government, which has an inflationary effect, there's no way you can do that without creating an inflationary effect, as well as the promotion and some other things with respect to the housing market, which I'll explain in a minute. It's clear that the federal government is dead set on kicking the proverbial can down the road with respect to housing, and with respect to a natural reset that should be occurring from higher interest rates. And essentially what this all amounts to is bailouts for Canadian mortgage holders, which will prevent them from having to default, which means that houses that should be coming up for sale and adding to supply won't be coming up for sale anytime soon. And that reduction in supply, combined with added demand from the immigration problem that we're about to face, is almost certainly going to lead to a floor in Canadian real estate prices and could potentially cause the real estate market to go up in value even further than it already has, especially in housing markets that haven't felt the big uptick that the big markets like Vancouver and Toronto have felt. So I want to show you some of the news, some of the data, and why this is so concerning. So first and foremost, let's talk about the pace of inflation. Now, this is good news. The pace of inflation cooled in February, which means that the increased interest rates are having their effect, at least in part. But this doesn't change the fact that there's been a pretty significant amount of increase in grocery costs and other things that basically can't be avoided when it comes to purchasing. And you have to remember that even though inflation is at 5.2% now, instead of the 8% that it was middle of last year, we still have a long way to go before it gets back to the 2% inflation target. Now, that's concerning because the Bank of Canada didn't even debate hiking interest rates in March. And this is even as the Fed in the US not only increased interest rates, but suggested that they were going to continue to do so. So we found ourselves in this position where we've paused our interest rate increases, and that may be creating a false sense of security for home buyers as they begin to expect that the interest rate hikes are over, which they may be, but they may not be as well. And the fact that we're seeing added activity in certain real estate markets could mean that housing could start contributing to inflation again, which could potentially lead to a scenario where interest rates would have to go up again. So confidence in the real estate market and the fact that interest rates have stopped going up could actually lead to a scenario down the road where interest rates have to go up. Now, on top of that, it's becoming clear that we have an immigration problem. And the problem isn't that we have immigration, because immigration is a good thing, but it's a bad thing when you don't have enough houses to support that immigration. And what we're seeing right now is that Canada needs 300,000 new rentals by 2026 in order to make sure that the gap between the amount of people we have coming into the country and the amount of housing that we have available doesn't quadruple. So in other words, if the current deficit is 25 to 30,000 units, that means that by 2026, we could have a deficit of up to 100,000 units. And I don't think I have to spell out what that means for real estate, because even if the deficit isn't just purpose-built rentals, the fact that there is not enough places for people to live will lead to higher rents, and then subsequently, it will also lead to higher prices and higher home values. There's just no way around that. If you don't have enough housing stock and you have more people coming in than the housing stock can handle, that leads to higher prices in both rents and in single-family home prices. And unfortunately, I've got bad news. There hasn't been an increase in new builds. In fact, new build permits are actually going down. And that's largely to do with multiple things, including the fact that interest rates are higher, land costs are going up, and on top of that, it is just becoming increasingly more impossible to deal with municipalities when it comes to building properties. Now, to compound the fact that we don't have enough housing stock, we also have immigration propelling Canada's population to grow at record pace. Now, the numbers in this article, which is from December, pale in comparison to the recent numbers from Stats Canada. In fact, the recent numbers from Stats Canada suggest that Canada's population last year grew by more than 1 million people for the first time ever. And more than 60% of that came from a net increase in the number of non-permanent residents, which was estimated at 607,000 people. And if you want to take a look at how this is progressing, this article is from March 22nd. It estimated the population was 39,566,000. If you go and you take a look at Statistics Canada's Canada Population Clock, it is showing that the population is now at 39,755,000. That's a population increase per day of over 2,000 people. And for reference, I'm filming this at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and the population since midnight has grown by 1,954 people. And as you can see from the population clock on the right here, it shows how fast different categories of people are growing. And if you take a look, births, so people who are being born in Canada, is at a rate of 1 birth every 1 minute and 24 seconds. The number of new non-permanent residents is at a rate of 1 every 50 seconds. So in other words, we have more people coming into Canada than are being born in Canada right now. So make of that what you will. I'm not going to defer anything from it, but I think that statistic is compelling. Now, on top of all this, we saw recent amendments to the foreign homebuyer ban. And I did a video on this week, which I will link to at the end. But here's the gist of this. What they've done is they've now made it possible for people who have more than 6 months remaining on a work permit to purchase a home. Now, in the eyes of voters, the foreign homebuyer ban was all about not allowing people to buy properties from other countries in order to hold them as a safe investment. But the reality here is that the largest number of people who are buying homes in Canada who are foreign homebuyers are the people who are coming here with work permits. So essentially the large majority of the people that would have been affected by this and the large majority of sales that would have been eliminated are now allowable. Now, I think if you're bringing in people to work here, you should allow them to buy housing, especially if it's on a 3 or a 5-year term. But I think it's also important to understand how these things work and to understand the fact that when you have something like a foreign homebuyer ban and it's perceived to have a certain effect on a real estate market, if you eliminate that ban for the large majority of people who are going to be purchasing, well, it essentially nullifies all of the effects. And in addition to that, they're now making it possible for foreign buyers to come in and purchase properties outside of major metropolitan areas, as well as purchase properties that are over 4 units. And that subsequently will have an effect on our rental market because properties that have more than 4 units are, guess what? Rentals. So the inherent increase in values to those rentals is going to have an inherent effect on rents and market values pretty much from top to bottom. And all of that isn't even the worst of it. The worst of it is the fact that the government is now intervening and making it possible for people who have existing mortgages to basically kick the can down the road with respect to defaults. Because in the federal budget this week, the Liberal government created a mortgage code of conduct, which has some good things in it as well as some bad things. The good things is that they are essentially going to eliminate high penalties and high fees for people who need to sell their properties because they are in distress. However, the bad thing is that they're going to allow Canadians to renew their mortgages into longer terms at renewal. Now, this is particularly important for variable rate mortgage holders. However, it does pose some problems because this is government intervening in the market. And those homeowners who have mortgages that they cannot afford are now going to be allowed to extend their amortizations and bring their payments down to more affordable amounts. And the problem here is that in the normal market, those people who could not renew their mortgages and could not afford their mortgages would be forced into a position where they would have to sell. And that would create supply in the market, which would create balance in the market and would ultimately lead to more reasonable housing prices. But by allowing these people to avoid having to face the idea of selling and downsizing, they're basically creating a scenario where housing prices are going to be artificially propped up for the long run. And at some point, this is all going to have to come to an end. The question is, how will it come to an end? Will it be a catastrophe in employment? Will it be a liquidity crisis? The answer is, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that we're continuing to push this problem further and further and further down the road. And as we do that, that creates an artificial floor for Canadian real estate, which is going to cause prices to either remain pretty similar to where they are right now or go up. And we're already seeing this throughout certain markets in Canada, even in Toronto, where homebuyers are flocking back into the market. And there is some data to suggest that millennials, who was once a generation who didn't necessarily believe that they needed to buy a home, after the run-ups in prices over the last couple of years, are now in a position where they do believe that they need to be purchasing homes out of fear that they may never own one. So with an interest rate pause and this artificial sense of security combined with immigration and a lack of housing, the Canadian real estate market is set to explode once again. And that is a scary thing. And I don't know what the advice here is because I could be completely wrong on this. And by the way, I'm not making any sort of prediction. All I'm doing is suggesting that there are certain things in place that could prop up the Canadian real estate market for the next couple of years. And that needs to be considered when you're looking at purchasing a property. And all I can say is, regardless of whether housing prices go up or down, it's these types of things that you need to consider when you're looking at your purchasing process. Because there are many people who are waiting for home prices to come down and may find themselves 6 to 12 months down the road not being able to buy because the opposite happened. So rather than trying to time the market, what I suggest is that if you are in the process of looking to buy a home, make sure that you absolutely can afford that home for the long term. Make sure it's the right type of home for you to buy. And if you want to know more about that, check out the video that I'm going to link right here that talks about why you shouldn't necessarily buy a home in 2023.